and I've been acting chair of the branch since March, since Nigel Todd died. And it was deeply moving to hear the tributes to Nigel Todd earlier. Nigel was my friend, and I miss our surreptitious meetings with carnations in bookshops. Nigel was a great friend, and he was a great political ally. I appreciate the lessons he taught me, his intrinsic goodness, his understated wisdom, his acerbic insight, and of course his sharp sense of humour. Nigel is also the only man who, for Valentine's Day, gave me the picture of another man. The man in question was Jeremy Corbyn, and I still have that picture on my desk at work. Education matters, and education mattered to Nigel. Through learning, Nigel believed that we could understand the other, that in learning we could work our way through something together, whatever it was, whether it was racism or prejudice or any other thing that lacked understanding. We need to learn together, to grow together, to create a better world. Socialism and education are not separate. They're an unending cycle of learning and of growing, a double helix, if you will. Nigel was an ardent proponent of adult education, and he was the driving force in creating our local North branch of the SEA. And it has since grown from the North East branch in our inaugural meeting last February to now cover the North East and Cumbria, so we're North. And I think he would be pleased with that. As a branch, we are committed to working together and learning together to secure Nigel's legacy whilst supporting campaigns that were close to his heart. And it was from that starting point that our branch, as Keith has mentioned earlier, challenged the decision by TES, the Establishment Education publication, to cease coverage of further education, which was to mean the sector. So the Establishment Education publication no longer carries items on colleges, on adult education, on community education, or on prison education. Anything basically that is not schools and not universities has been literally swept out of their scope. The lifelong learning sector precluded from academic or professional scrutiny. So we garnered the support from Gordon Marsden, from the Right to Learn campaign, from the North of Tyne Mayor, Jamie Driscoll, and as you know, he holds the purse strings for adult education in this region. From Chion Wara, she's the MP for this constituency, but she also sits on the All-Parliamentary Group for Adult Education. From the education writer, Melissa Benn, she's also one of our vice presidents, and the British Psychological Society. Adult education is, as you know, important to be able to access, be it for teaching English to refugees, upskilling, to be able to retrain for new careers, or dare I say it, for the sheer joy of learning. Maeve Binchy's bestseller, Evening Class, is now lost to 2 generations of children and young people who have never heard of night school. Though after more than a decade of Conservative rule, it's hard to remember that there was ever a time when people just learned for the sake of learning. We're all sold this idea now that education is a continuum, that it starts at age 4 in reception and it ends for some at 18 and for others at 21. But life and education, it's not monodirectional. And if it was, well, how boring. So why is adult education important to me? Well, quite bizarrely, and it is quite bizarre, I was taught to recite school, college, university, school, college, university, before I even started school. I flunked my A-levels and I didn't go to the right type of university. I went back to night school in my 20s to do GCSEs in chemistry and biology because I was told that I would never succeed in the sciences. And I've engaged in various community education at different times over the last 20 or 30 years. And more recently, I've had the most amazing experiences in the last decade through Erasmus training for professionals. Because of Erasmus, I have swum in midnight lakes under moonlit skies. I've built a sweat lodge, slept in forest shelters. I've taken solo quests, crossed thresholds and borders, stretched boundaries, challenged assumptions, cemented my identity as European, and made beautiful lifelong friendships. With professionals from across Europe, I have participated in trainings in behaviour management, inclusion, challenging narratives, emotional intelligence, mediation, supporting people through change and more. And these have been incredible, valuable, free professional development opportunities that education funding cuts have rendered education and employers unable to provide. So much more than just European university exchanges, Erasmus provided adult education. They had a huge adult education project. Sports, job shadowing, volunteering, training for trainers and training for professional development for people that work with young people. And at the heart of every project were the key themes of anti-racism and cooperation. And don't we think that those themes are so incredibly relevant now with everything that's going on? One trainer friend of mine, and she's based in Central Europe, she uses loopholes in funding rules to include in some of her projects a Middle Eastern participant who lives in forced exile, deprived of a passport. And he doesn't have a national identity either. So for him, access to those trainings are a respite from a repressive political regime. Well, her actions and his stories of European peace and friendship, they speak international solidarity louder than any textbook. The loss of Erasmus is huge, and the loss of Erasmus is painful. So education should be something that we can come back to upskill, to learn new things, to develop ideas, maybe learn English, prepare for next steps, meet new people, build confidence, and enjoy the experience. And we know that there are so many benefits to health and well-being too. But there's something also about hope here, and that's so important, because there's something in the idea that in learning, we can lift ourselves out of our situation. And that currency of hope is needed more than ever before. Working with adults is so interesting because they bring questions and ideas and their own life experiences with them, which sometimes creates barriers for them. Sometimes they're their greatest barriers in education. And this links to Vygotsky's socio-cultural theory of education, that culture and lived experience is significant in informing our learning. And so we must be aware of different starting points, and we must be aware of barriers so that we can support our students to overcome them. Secondly, Vygotsky said that language is the root of culture, so we have a very strong argument here to push for ESOL funding for inclusion and integration. But to see language as just English is limiting. Art is language, music is language, British Sign Language is language. There are multiple languages and there are multiple ways to the roots of culture. Thirdly, and importantly, Vygotsky said that individuals learn and develop within their role in the community, which is where the WEA has its roots, very local in the community. But I do just want to say something about community and how we understand that, and that links to the question that was asked earlier and to some comments that John made in his talk. Because we have communities within community, and we have people who are disengaged or not connected, and it is not enough for us to expect these people to sign up because we advertise something. So I've been doing some work for a couple of years now with a group of women. They're from right across Newcastle, from all the different mosques across Newcastle, so that involves women from different cultures, different backgrounds, and it's quite an important group actually. But I wanted to know why they weren't where I was. I wanted to know, when I was leading my trade union branch, why they weren't there in my meetings. I wanted to know why they're not there in my Socialist Education Association meetings. And so I asked them, I said, where are you? And these women, most of them have been through education, or they're about to go through education, or they know people that are benefiting from ESOL teaching. and most of them have got children who are going through the education system as well. So why aren't they there in these meetings when we're talking about ideas that will influence and inform their decision making, inform and influence their lives? Now that relationship has taken time and it's taken trust. Community is people, and people need investment. People need investment in terms of funding. They need investment in terms of time. Vygotsky also said that adults are an important source of cognitive development for their children. So whether parents are training to learn new skills for a job, whether they're learning English and maths so that they can help their children with their homework, whether they're doing something so that it builds their confidence, it doesn't matter, because these are all things that have positive outcomes, that have a positive impact on their children, directly improving the next generation's life chances. So education isn't just a continuum, this is about loops. And these loops of education, these loops of learning, affect everybody that is around us. So adult education has been hit hard by long-term funding cuts, and opportunities for upskilling and retraining are limited, and learning for pleasure is nigh on extinct. So it's hard to understand the lack of investment when the benefits and the rewards are so great. The feminist writer Bell Hooks says we shouldn't get drawn into binary arguments because they merely uphold the status quo. So we get stuck in this cycle of we need more money, well you're not getting it, but we need more money, well you're not getting it. Bell Hooks says that instead we need to look at the whole gestalt. We need to look at the whole thing, and that needs to be our starting point for making a challenge. So if we look at the whole of education over the last decade, we have a drive on academisation in schools. We have chronic underfunding of special needs, the getting rid of BTECs in favour of T-levels, an effective pay freeze, long-term cuts in all sectors, culls of experienced teachers through redundancy, punitive teaching observations and performance management, cuts to pensions, and that's teacher pensions and university pensions, increased marketisation and a drive to cheap, focus on skills for jobs, training people to do and not to think, the not platforming of people who disagree. Now when there are bodyguards in lecture theatres, something is telling us that there is something really not right. We've got cuts to trade union education, and we've got the very recent interference by the government in teacher training. We've got the losing of Erasmus, and we're back to the education press not covering the lifelong learning sector. Now, none of these things are separate. They are all linked. Systematic underfunding of education combined with an emphasis on skills, training not teaching, teaching people to do and not to think, keeps them in their place. People who don't know how to think critically or to make challenge are less likely to challenge the imposition of austerity and cuts, and they are less likely to challenge limitations placed on them to their human rights. So this is about creating a quasi-feudal society with an elite and privileged view at the top, and everybody else left behind below. But there is something that you can do about this. So the first thing that you can do is join the SEA. So we are Labour's only educational affiliate, and we work to shape and influence policy. So join us, join our branch, come to our meeting next week, where we are handing the meeting over to our members so that they can shape and inform the direction in which we take, and then we as a branch can take that forward. And secondly, if you have a mobile phone with you, then I invite you to get it out now, if you want to. So if we were at work, if I was at work with my students, the students would be desperately struggling to get them out of their bags right now. So hands up if you're on Twitter. Anybody in the room on Twitter? Okay, keep your hands up then if you're following the WEA. And are you following the SEA? And anyone following the Right to Learn campaign? that's interesting. Okay, so I've left QR codes on your tables. So if you scan those, they'll take you straight through. You've got one for the SEA to the join page and one to the Right to Learn campaign. Now, the Right to Learn campaign was set up last year with the intention of driving on the right of everybody, no matter who they are or where they are, to access education throughout their lives. The Right to Learn campaign came out of the work of the Centenary Commission on Adult Education, which was mentioned earlier, and was founded by Gordon Marsden, former Shadow Minister for Education, Matt Waddock, the former Head of Policy for UCU, Professor Graham Atherton, who's involved with NEON, for people who know about NEON, and Professor Vicky Duckworth. Now, you might be interested in inviting Vicky to one of your meetings. She specialises in adult education, but particularly around marginalised women and domestic violence. Anyway, if you scan the code, you can sign up for email updates, and you have access to current high-profile articles and leading comment on education. But then, and this is what people were talking about earlier with social media, then you can share this with your contacts. So you can share it on email, by Twitter or Facebook. And together, we can keep the story of adult education moving and current. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya and John.